What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.
Good morning. Can I remind members of the COVID-related measures that are in place and that face coverings should be worn when moving around the Chamber and across the Holyrood campus? The first item of business is general questions. In order to get in as many people as possible, I'd prefer short and succinct questions and answers to match. And at question number 1, I call Neil Bibby.
To ask the Scottish Government how the allocations of funding in its budget for 2022-23 will support local services in the West Scotland region.
Cabinet Secretary Kate Forbes.
Well, the budget for next year delivers record levels of funding to help restore public services across the whole of Scotland, including in the West Scotland region, including record funding for health, record funding to tackle child poverty and at least £2 billion in infrastructure initiatives. And the local government finance settlement alone will provide over £1.7 billion for vital day-to-day services such as schools and social care in the local authorities that either wholly or partly within the West of Scotland region.
Neil Bibby.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. Year after year, local councils are targeted by the Scottish Government for core funding cuts, and this year is no different despite the council elections in May. The COSLA President has said that both service cuts and council tax rises are probably inevitable. The Minister will know that all 32 council leaders, including SNP leaders, have unanimously condemned the Government's budget as unacceptable. Some even say it's the worst they have ever seen. Are your own council leaders wrong? And is the Minister really saying that every penny has been spent and there is no more money anywhere in the budget to prevent service cuts and council tax hikes in the West of Scotland and across the country?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, SNP council leaders do an exceptional job right across Scotland, but in terms of the overall budget right now, our own budget position is challenging, a 5.2% reduction in next year's budget versus this year's budget for the Scottish budget. And we've been clear that we can't inflation-proof any part of the budget. In terms of local authorities, we have ensured that we protect the core budget in cash terms, but I've already made the caveat about inflation. But on top of that, obviously providing additional funding for the pressures that local government has themselves identified, not least in social care and education.
Question number 2, Maggie Chapman.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what measures it is planning to introduce to protect Scotland's communities and ecosystems from land speculation associated with carbon offsetting.
Minister Mary McCallan.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. Mechanisms do already exist to support responsible investment in our land, including the Scottish Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement. But I am very aware of concern about recent purchases and developments, and last year I asked the Scottish Land Commission to review the rural land market and offer advice to the Government on how we ensure that private investment in natural capital, which is needed to help Scotland address the climate and nature crises, is invested in a way which is helpful to our wider political priorities, including empowering and benefiting rural and island communities.
Maggie Chapman.
Can I thank her for that response? We know that a range of companies and investments are already buying up land in Scotland for use for carbon offsetting. Brewdog and Shell are two examples. Private investment funds and asset managers are generating and selling carbon credits. Even SNIB is putting money into this. Can the Minister outline how much land has currently been bought for such speculation, how much public money has been invested in such approaches, and what we can do within our limited powers to ensure Scotland does not get sold for carbon offsetting greenwash and to protect communities from displacement by green lairds?
Minister.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. I would just again begin by stressing that much of Maggie Chapman's views here I share. My vision for a net zero Scotland is one in which more people can live and work sustainably on our land. The member is right to highlight the risks that she has, and I can assure her I am alert to them. I'm determined that increased investment in Scotland's natural capital delivers benefits for our local communities in line with those important just transition principles. That's exactly why I have commissioned the work of the Scottish Land Commission, which I await. And it's why we are reviewing the Scottish Land Rights and Responsibility Statements to make sure that it is as up to date as possible and addressing these contemporary challenges. And I'll look forward to returning to Parliament to discuss these matters once I have that information in hand.
Question number 3, Bob Doris.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it has any concerns over the use of video doorbells in domestic properties.
Minister Ash Regan.
Anyone operating domestic CCTV, such as video doorbells, must ensure that they comply with the relevant laws and respect their neighbours' privacy. People who believe their privacy and data protection rights are not being upheld should attempt to resolve this with their neighbour, and they have the right to make a complaint to the Information Commissioner if that is not successful.
Bob Doris.
I thank the Minister for that answer. Video doorbells in communal areas of flats often record footage of anyone passing via motion sensors with footage accessed remotely. This can exacerbate neighbour disputes and impact on vulnerable individuals. That's been my experience. The suggestion from the ICO that those concerned about surveillance can request access to footage held on them and ensure this is deleted when no longer required is just fanciful. Can I ask the Minister to consider how, despite the reserved nature of data protection, we can use existing powers over housing and community safety to work in partnership with housing organisations and Police Scotland to seek to review, regulate or restrict the use of video doorbells for residential flatted properties in Scotland?
Minister. I think the member makes a number of valid points there in that question. There are avenues for people to challenge a neighbour's use of a video doorbell. So if they believe that domestic CCTV is being used in a way that is, for instance, antisocial, that it may be harassing or intimidating, then this, of course, may then constitute a criminal matter, and they would be able to then contact the police. The Scottish Government recognises that everyone has the right to feel safe in their community, and that's why we're committed to tackling all forms of antisocial behaviour to create an inclusive and respectful society where individual and collective rights are supported and where neighbour disputes are resolved fairly and swiftly. Police Scotland and local authorities lead on these interventions, and we have a range of options available to tackling this type of antisocial behaviour, and we are committed to ensuring that all the agencies have the power and resources that they need.
Thank you. Question number 4, Siobhian Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what it is doing to take forward the recommendations in the Scottish Animal Welfare Commission's report on the use of rodent glue traps in Scotland, including the recommendation to ban such traps.
Minister Mary McCallan.
Thanks, Presiding Officer, and thank you to Ms Brown for the question. We are committed to maintaining the very highest welfare standards in Scotland for animals, including wildlife. We have carefully considered the Scottish Animal Welfare Commission's findings alongside all other relevant evidence. And I'm pleased to announce in Parliament today that we intend to end the cruel practice of setting glue traps. The Commission's report is clear. that there are significant animal welfare issues related to the use of glue traps, not only for rodents, but also for other non-target species such as wild birds. Therefore, we will bring forward legislation to ban glue traps in this parliamentary term.
Siobhan Brown.
I thank the Minister for that answer. I welcome this news. Glue traps are one of the cruelest methods of rodent control. Can the Minister confirm that, as well as banning the use of glue traps, will we also ban their sale here in Scotland?
Minister.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. Our intention is to ban both the sale and use of glue traps. However, there are implications arising from the Internal Market Act, which can undermine decisions made by this Parliament, as we know, including in wholly devolved climate and environmental policy areas. We intend to work through these issues to achieve a ban.
Question number 5, Neil Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it and Transport Scotland have had with ScotRail and Network Rail regarding the accessibility of Shotts railway station.
Minister Graham Day.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Transport Scotland has been in dialogue with ScotRail and Network Rail to discuss the feasibility study that Transport Scotland commissioned into improving accessibility at Shotts Station, following a meeting with local representatives and the now disbanded Shotts Community Council. Progression of the study, unfortunately, was delayed due to restrictions imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic. However, analysis of the report is underway, and it's anticipated that further discussions will be held with Network Rail in the coming weeks to enable the details to be finalised.
Neil Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I thank the Minister for that answer. Previous work at Shotts railway station has seen the installation of a new ramp, but its length and gradient, particularly in winter, are less than ideal for people using wheelchairs or with other mobility issues. I've previously contacted Transport Scotland, as the Minister suggested, about this on behalf of constituents, and there was an agreement to conduct that review of accessibility of the station. And I understand part of the responsibility of this is with Network Rail. However, can the Minister provide an update on that feasibility and whether or not the potential for a lift will be part of that review?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, can I commend Neil Gray, but also his predecessor, Alec Neil, for their diligence on this issue, and say to him that all options for improving accessibility will be considered, including lifts. And I've asked my rail officials to keep the member updated as this progresses.
Stephanie Callaghan.
Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government whether it has had any communications with ScotRail regarding the impact of reducing operating hours at Bellshill train station on the most vulnerable rail users.
Minister.
Presiding Officer, Ms Callaghan raises an important point. Clearly, technology has changed how people want to access information and tickets, but we also need to acknowledge that there's a place for local staffed services on the ground where and when they are needed most. The consultation offers the public the chance to have their say on how to provide an efficient and cost-effective service for the future, and I would encourage people to get involved, including local MSPs, but also particularly groups representing people with support needs. It's critical that we understand how any proposed changes might affect them.
And question number 6, Joe Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the action it is taking to address fuel poverty.
Cabinet Secretary Michael Matheson.
I know the current situation with energy prices will cause many people to worry about the cost of their fuel bills. We share their concerns, and with the limited powers available to us, we are already taking action to address this, including through our £41 million Winter Support Fund. But with powers over energy market reserved to Westminster, we must also see action from the UK Government, and I've written to them suggesting a number of measures we believe they should consider, including a VAT cut and targeted support for those on low incomes.
Joe Fitzpatrick.
Thank the Minister for his answer. The Fuel Well scheme, introduced by Dundee's SNP administration and supported by Scottish Government funding, provides financial support of between £90 and £150 to help with winter fuel costs for those most in need. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that while this action from our SNP colleagues in Dundee is commendable, the UK Government, which has cut £20 a week from universal credit, urgently needs to step up and take responsibility for dealing with spiralling energy costs?
Cabinet Secretary.
I would absolutely agree, and I commend Dundee City Council for its efforts to help those struggling with their heating costs. It's an excellent example of the kind of schemes local councils across Scotland have established to help vulnerable households with assistance through the Winter Support Fund. Undoubtedly, the UK Government must do far more to protect households from the drastic increase in energy bills being talked about. Reversing the indefensible cut to universal credit would certainly help, but there are many other actions which we want them to take, including cutting VAT on energy bills. That would be one of the simplest short-term means of helping energy consumers. We need to see action urgently from a UK Government because many households are already under severe pressure financially due to increasing energy prices.
Willie Rennie.
Only a tiny fraction of all the homes in North East Fife have accessed the Scottish Government's home insulation financial support packages, less than 1,000 out of 40,000 homes. As we're in a climate emergency but also an energy emergency, what is the Government going to do to speed that up and expand it so more people can access this support?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the member may be aware that we've invested almost £1 billion in home energy efficiency programmes since 2009, and we've set out our commitment to invest over £1.5 billion to help to decarbonise and to make properties more energy efficient over the coming years. And I've got no doubt that the energy-based, area-based schemes that we're operating in areas such as North East Fife and the member's constituency will continue to benefit his constituents, and we want to see that expanded and developed going forward in order to help to make sure we make properties more energy efficient and also meet our climate change targets.
Thank you. Question number 7, Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what assessment criteria it will use to determine whether the Access to Bike scheme represents good value for money.
Minister Patrick Harvie.
Thank you. This is a pilot scheme designed to test whether providing interest-free loans can improve bike ownership and help alleviate transport poverty. The 348 expressions of interest received so far shows that there is demand for such provision. We will assess whether the scheme represents good value for money by the number of bikes purchased by September 2022. Cycling UK will provide a report on its operation after year one. This scheme is in its infancy, and we'll judge its effectiveness after the pilot period rather than after a few weeks, as well as continuing to develop the scheme in light of ongoing feedback.
Brian Whittle.
Thank the Minister for that answer, but I don't think it's unreasonable to ask why a scheme that has access to £390,000 of public funds to offer 500 loans has failed to provide even one 3 months after it opened. Set against this, I'm speaking to the social enterprise in East Ayrshire Cycle Station, who rescue unwanted bikes, refurbish them and sell them to the public at a fraction of cost new, 650 so far. And I think I also like to extend an open invitation to the Minister to join me in a visit at some point. The organisation has been hugely popular in the area and encouraged many people to take up cycling, but now they're struggling to obtain funds to grow further. With that in mind, will the Minister commit to making funds equal to or greater than that allocated to his loan scheme to supporting existing successful local initiatives like Cycle Station?
Minister.
Well, we do support a wide range of organisations, including those which provide cycle repair and refurbishment. I'd be happy to explore that issue with the member in more detail if he has specific local examples to bear in mind. But I do find it a little odd that the Conservatives over the winter period were claiming both that we have splurged £400,000 and also that we haven't issued a single penny. I congratulate them on the intellectual agility necessary to believe both these false claims simultaneously.
Question number 8, Eleanor Whittam.
To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on the designation of UNESCO biosphere reserves in Scotland as areas of significance for sustainable development and climate change.
Minister Mary McCallum.
Thanks, Presiding Officer, and thanks to the member for the question. There are 2 biosphere reserves in Scotland, Galloway in Southern Ayrshire and Wester Ross, which together are home to over 100,000 people. Both of Scotland's biospheres have received funding from our enterprise agencies, and we support the biosphere approach to community empowerment through the environment, where that is chosen and sustained by a local community.
Eleanor Whittam.
The Galloway and Southern Ayrshire biosphere, which covers my constituency, has significant support from South of Scotland Enterprise, local government, a range of private businesses, environmental NGOs and community representatives, and that this as a UNESCO biosphere is identified in the local development plans and regional spatial strategies for Ayrshire and Southern Scotland. Does the Minister agree with me that it is a great shame that the UNESCO biospheres appear to have been missed in the draft National Planning Framework 4, and in recognising the importance of the key strategic values that they lead on in terms of sustainability and contributing to the wider social, economic, environmental and tourism aspirations of the area, can the Minister commit to ensuring that UNESCO biospheres are truly recognised and are highlighted in the new National Planning Framework 4?
Minister.
Thank you. Yes, in line with the member's comments, the Scottish Government agrees that participation can build communities' ability to tackle challenges and to sustain a healthy, vibrant community. The UNESCO Man in the Biosphere programme is based on that bottom-up, stakeholder-driven initiative, and as such, biospheres are inherently an initiative which must be developed and sustained locally. However, the draft National Planning Framework 4, while it doesn't specifically name the 2 biosphere reserves, does clearly set out that local development plans should identify and protect locally, regionally, nationally valued natural assets, landscapes, species, habitats. So, and in addition to the current parliamentary scrutiny of the draft NPF4, we are considering widely until the end of March, and we welcome comments on our draft to support what I hope will be a finalised NPF4 which will address these issues and we can bring back to Parliament for approval.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. We will now move to First Minister's questions, and at question number 1 I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Does the First Minister agree with Pete Wishart, currently the SNP's longest-serving MP at Westminster, who said earlier on this week it was a fair point that her government had imposed too many COVID restrictions over Christmas?
First Minister.
I'm not sure that is a fair representation of Pete Wishart's comments, but can I first take the opportunity, Presiding Officer, to recognise that Pete Wishart is, I think, Scotland's longest-serving Member of Parliament, which I think goes to show what an outstanding service Pete Wishart does for his constituents. And let me take the opportunity, and I'm sure Douglas Ross will join me in paying tribute to his public service. I think we introduced a series of balanced protective measures over the Christmas period, coupled with the extraordinary response of the public, changing their behaviour, and of course the extraordinary success of the booster programme. We are thankfully now in a better position than we might have been when we were looking ahead before the Christmas period. But we're not in a position that I think allows us any complacency. COVID rates are still high. There are still significant uncertainties ahead, which is why I think doctors, nurses, NHS managers, trade unions all expressed some concern with the Prime Minister's announcement yesterday to lift all restrictions at this stage, including the requirement to wear face coverings. So we will continue to take a proportionate and balanced set of decisions to try to get through this next, I hope, final phase of the pandemic and keep the country as safe as we possibly can do while we're doing so.
Douglas Ross.
The First Minister said it wasn't a fair representation of Pete Wishart's comments. It was a direct quote. He was asked, has the First Minister in Scotland introduced too many COVID restrictions over Christmas? And his response was, that is a fair point. He agreed with the premise of the question. And the First Minister went on to laud his parliamentary career. Perhaps you could maybe listen to him when he, an SNP member, elected representative, is saying the restrictions imposed over Christmas were too much. Because the First Minister imposed restrictions that had a massive impact on jobs, on businesses, on people's mental and physical health. But we can now see they weren't needed. It was the Scottish public's actions, not the SNP government's restrictions, that got this right. The First Minister has tried to build a reputation for caution during this pandemic. But she was far too gung-ho in imposing extra restrictions last month. Will she now accept that her government went too far?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, the public did comply. They complied with what the government asked them to do. I think Douglas Ross is striking rather a desperate note right now, just as if he is seriously describing Pete Wishart, showing, as all elected representatives should, some respect for the point somebody was making to him, as evidence that Pete Wishart agrees with Douglas Ross rather than with this government, then all that says to people is that Douglas Ross is showing rather more political desperation right now than we even thought he might have been. We've taken a balanced approach. Let me just say what I think. At the moment, this cautious approach is the one that we should be taking. That's my sentiments. Those are not actually my words, though. Those are the words of Sandesh Gohani, MSP, on BBC Scotland on the 7th of January. So if Douglas Ross is basing his entire line of questioning to me right now on something Pete Wishart said, then what is his response to his own MSP, saying that the cautious approach is the one that we should be taking? But then we've got Professor Susan Meaky, a member of the UK Government SAGE Committee. Scotland is doing something that is very good from a public health point of view. And of course, the Scottish approach is in line with the Welsh Government's approach and the Northern Irish Government's approach. We're taking a sensible approach through this, which is why infection levels, although dropping now thankfully in all parts of the UK, are lower in Scotland than they are in England right now. And over the festive period, the numbers of people in hospital proportionately were lower. So we are not out of the woods yet, although things look far more positive. But I'm going to continue to take a cautious approach because, frankly, the price of throwing caution to the wind is not paid by governments. The price of throwing caution to the wind is paid by people across the country in terms of ill health and, sadly, in some cases, serious illness and death. And that's a price I don't think I should impose on the people of Scotland.
Douglas Ross.
First Minister, serious illness and death doesn't just come from COVID. It comes from restrictions being put in place that have a massive impact on people's mental health, on their physical health. We have been living with this pandemic now for 2 years, and I think the First Minister would do better to respond to the points being made. She may not like them, but the points and questions being made, rather than launching personal attacks on the opposition politicians who do it. Because not only did the First Minister impose unnecessary restrictions, she actually wanted to go further. The First Minister repeatedly claimed throughout December that the UK Government was holding her back from putting Scotland into lockdown again. She wanted to close down the economy, no matter the impact that would have on Scottish jobs and businesses. But the First Minister promised compensation when her restrictions were introduced. Yet now we're coming out of the restrictions, that compensation still hasn't been delivered to many businesses. They've not received a single penny. This week, the Federation of Small Businesses said, and I quote, "Thousands of Scottish businesses needlessly go under every year because of late payment." Will the First Minister accept that her government is currently the worst offender of late payments in Scotland?
First Minister.
No, but can I say to Douglas Ross, the pandemic is causing the serious impact on individuals and businesses across Scotland, the UK, Europe and the entire world. Much as we might all like to be able to do so, and believe me, I would love to be able to do so, we can't just magic it away. No country is able to do that. And I have to say to Douglas Ross, he has stood in his position in this chamber at every key juncture in the management of this pandemic since he's been back in this chamber, and he's opposed the decisions the Scottish Government has taken, even at times when there were exactly the same decisions that were being taken by his colleagues in the Westminster Government. He has decided to take an entirely opportunistic approach to the handling of a global pandemic. And I think people will judge that, and I don't think they will judge it very kindly. If we had listened to Douglas Ross, then over these past months, we wouldn't have had sensible measures like asking people to wear face coverings. We wouldn't have had other mitigations in our schools, for example. We wouldn't have advised people sensibly to work from home. And we wouldn't, therefore, be in the stronger position that we're in right now, able to lift these protective measures from Monday of next week. So, given that Douglas Ross has called it wrong, literally at every juncture of this pandemic, forgive me if I'm not going to start listening to him now. In terms of business support, of course, much of the and incidentally, on the issue of opposition politicians and quoting people, Douglas Ross opened his line of questioning today, misrepresenting, in my view, Pete Wishart, and then he takes issue with the fact that I give a direct quote from Sandesh Gohani. And let me repeat that direct quote. At the moment, this cautious approach is the one that we should be taking. On the issue of business support, of course, much of this business support will not be available to businesses suffering the same impact south of the border. All local authorities... If Douglas Ross doesn't think they're suffering the same impact, then I suggest he really needs to get out a little bit more. All local authorities have started processing payments. Some local authorities have made very good progress and say that they've already paid almost all of the hospitality and leisure businesses eligible for support. All local authorities are on track to complete 100% of payments to hospitality and leisure businesses affected by the Christmas cancellations and physical distancing by the 31st of January. So that support available here that is not available elsewhere, and we will continue to do the right thing by businesses.
Douglas Ross. The First Minister needs to make her mind up. She's accusing the Conservatives of opposing every measure she puts forward, and then in the same breath she's accusing the Conservatives for wanting a cautious approach. It is simply not opportunistic to trust the people in Scotland, to trust that they can learn to live with COVID rather than having to live with her government's restrictions, which are having a massive impact on jobs, on businesses and communities across Scotland, and they're not getting the money or the support that they were promised. And the First Minister has got the big decisions wrong over the last few months. Too quick to bring in unnecessary COVID restrictions, too late to launch mass vaccination centres, too late to change the self-isolation rules, too late to get funding to businesses who need it. The First Minister says she doesn't shy away from mistakes she's made in the handling of this pandemic. So can't she finally just admit that by introducing these tough restrictions here in Scotland before Christmas, and by wanting to introduce even tougher restrictions, she simply made the wrong call?
First Minister. Well, I'll let the people of Scotland judge the impact of the calls I and my government have made. But let me say this. Right now, on first doses, on second doses, on third doses, on booster vaccination doses, Scotland is the most vaccinated part of the United Kingdom. So, Presiding Officer, if Douglas Ross's proposition is that we left it too late, then what on earth does that say about his own colleagues in the Westminster Government? We also, in terms of the ONS figures this week, infection levels in England right now are over 20% higher than in Scotland. I don't think it's a competition, but if Douglas Ross wants to make these comparisons, then they are the comparisons. There is the data. But can I say gently to Douglas Ross, because I know he's having a tough time politically, but can I say gently, it is inconsistent, entirely inconsistent. There is no consistency in saying, as his health spokesperson did, that the cautious approach is the one that we should be taking, and then opposing every cautious measure that we choose to take for opportunistic reasons. So can I suggest that Douglas Ross just gets his own house in order, perhaps suggest to more of his colleagues that they obey the rules that are in place when they are in place, and leaves this government to get on with steering this country responsibly and in a mature, grown-up fashion through the global pandemic.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, the First Minister said that the auction of major offshore wind projects was one of the most significant days that Scotland has seen in a very, very long time. I welcome inward investment, but it shouldn't come at a cost of the Scottish economy, our just transition or our values. So let's be clear about what has happened. This SNP government have sold on the cheap the right to profit from Scotland's energy transition to multinational companies with questionable human rights records. One of the new owners of Scotland's seabed were fined $54 million for bribing Nigerian officials and $88 million for bribing Indonesian officials. Another one was found to have contributed to human rights abuses at one of its construction sites, of destroying villages in Myanmar, of relying on forced labour and using slavery to build pipelines. Surely these aren't people the Scottish Government should be doing business with.
First Minister.
Crown Estates Scotland made the decisions on the companies, the consortiums that would be awarded the status to develop projects around our coast. They have appropriate processes in place to do due diligence. But this is one of the most exciting things for Scotland in a long, long time, which probably is why Scottish Labour has been so negative about it. Not only does this give us the potential to meet our own energy needs from renewable sources, it positions us with the ability to be a major exporter of renewable energy, including green hydrogen, and it gives enormous potential for our supply chain. The estimate is for every gigawatt of power that will be generated from these projects, there will be £1 billion of investment in our supply chain. And for the first time, of course, companies have had to set out in statements what they will do to support our supply chain. So this is good news. There are complicated consenting and planning processes that lie ahead, but this offers massive potential to Scotland, and it's potential we intend to seize with both hands.
Anna Sarwar.
I agree with the opportunity, but values matter. Just last week, the SNP were right to accuse the Tory government of tolerating human rights abuses as a price worth paying to secure deals for the UK. This week, the SNP has done the same. So what Nicola Sturgeon, in effect, is saying, it's bad when the Tories do it, but it's OK when the SNP do it. There's another concerning part of this deal. One of the new owners of Scotland's seabed is the Swedish-owned, state-owned energy company. That state-owned Swedish energy company can now use their part of the Scottish seabed to keep energy bills down for people in Sweden. The First Minister once promised a Scottish state-owned energy company. In fact, this SNP government spent almost £500,000 of taxpayers' money on the project before scrapping the plans. Why is it that people of Sweden now own a bigger stake in Scottish energy supply and distribution than the Scottish people? The SNP, not stronger for Scotland, but stronger for Sweden.
First Minister.
Yes, Sweden is also an independent country with full control over energy, which of course this government and this parliament doesn't have. But that's a matter that Anna Sarwar might want to reflect on a little bit more. And of course, just today, the Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero is talking about the opportunities are in consultation for our plans for an energy public agency to steer these kinds of developments in the future. This is a thoroughly positive opportunity for Scotland, and no wonder then that Scottish Labour just wants to girn about it and be negative. That's what's characterised Scottish Labour for a long time, and it's why they're sitting over there these days, not there and certainly not here. Let me just repeat the opportunity to meet our own energy needs from renewable sources and to keep energy costs down, the opportunity to export renewable energy to other countries, the opportunity to grow a supply chain and create thousands, possibly tens of thousands of jobs, and of course the opportunity to raise revenues for the Scottish Government, for public services here in Scotland. From the lease options alone, £700 million, and then when these projects are operational, there will be rent fees in addition to that. So this is a thoroughly positive opportunity, and perhaps Anna Sarwar, just for once, could find it within himself to be positive about the potential of Scotland.
Anna Sarwar.
I've said I welcome investment. I've said I welcome and recognise the opportunity. But this is such a desperate, poor reply. The First Minister often likes to accuse opposition parties of demonstrating a brass neck. That was a brass neck from the First Minister in that reply. Accused the Tories of bad values on human rights, accept human rights values as being part of the price worth paying for Scottish opportunities here. Because this is about the Scottish supply chain, Scottish companies and Scottish jobs. Because the sad reality is that this is an SNP government that doesn't understand economic development. Scottish bridges built with Chinese steel, Scottish wind farms with turbines built in Indonesia, ferries not built with Scottish shipyards but built in Poland and Turkey, and now Scotland's seabed owned by foreign multinationals with woeful human rights records. We've heard the list of promises from the First Minister before. A state-owned energy company promised, please. Never delivered. Scotland's becoming a renewables like Saudi Arabia, promised but never delivered. 130,000 green jobs promised but never delivered. After 15 years, isn't it the case that this is an SNP government that has sold out Scottish jobs, sold off Scottish assets and now sold out Scottish values?
Thank you, Mr Sarwar. First Minister.
I'm just sitting here reflecting, almost unbelievably actually, that Anas Sarwar has just accused me of behaving like a Tory the day after his party threw open the doors to a Tory MP. There is now so little difference between Labour and the Tories that their MPs are just interchangeable. So brass neck, I would say to Mr Sarwar, I think he'll be polishing his for the rest of the day. Look, Anas Sarwar and his many predecessors as Scottish Labour leader, I have to say I've forgotten how many predecessors as Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar has had, but they've been trotting out these negative, talk-down Scotland tropes for years. And all that has happened is that they've gone further and further and further down in the ratings in Scottish politics. They've lost more and more votes, and my party's share of the vote has increased. So there is real... I came into the chamber expecting political desperation from Douglas Ross today. I think I've seen even more from Anas Sarwar, which probably says all we need to know. I'll get on with encouraging the potential for Scottish renewable energy, for Scottish jobs, for revenue for the Scottish Government. And I'll be delighted at the next time of asking to put that record before the Scottish people. I'm not so sure Anas Sarwar will be quite so keen.
We'll now take supplementary questions, and I call Fiona Hislop.
First Minister, increasing energy prices are of very real concern. What discussions has she had with the Westminster Government on help for families to combat the spiralling financial cost of the energy crisis?
First Minister.
Well, the energy crisis, the cost of living crisis, is increasing on a daily basis at the moment. It is of deep concern to this Government. We're taking a range of measures ourselves through our £41 million winter fund, 7 new benefits aimed at low-income households, and of course shortly we will double the Scottish child payment. But of course key powers do remain reserved to Westminster. We have written to the UK Government countless times about poverty, and also just last week set out further actions which we have outlined that they must urgently take to tackle rising energy bills. But if a government, as is the case with the Westminster Government, is so busy trying to deal with self-inflicted sleaze and scandal and daily defections and deflections, then their focus is not on the cost of living crisis, it's on themselves. And this is both deeply regrettable and deeply serious, because they are right now neglecting the real issues that people are facing right across the country.
Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, diabetes rates are rapidly increasing across Scotland, with diagnosis more than doubling in the last 20 years. Diabetes Scotland reported last week that access to the correct diabetes technology, such as insulin pumps, can be life-changing for patients, but just over 10% of 18-year-olds use them. The gap in diabetes outcomes between affluent and deprived areas in Scotland is widening. So can I ask the First Minister what urgent action can be put in place to ensure this worrying trend is reversed?
First Minister.
It is an important issue. We will work with Diabetes Scotland to take forward the findings of the report, making sure that there is both access to insulin pumps for young people, but for people of all ages is important, but also that they are used and they are used effectively is vital. We have made improvements in years gone by in this, and we will continue to focus on making further improvements for the sake of people across Scotland who live with that condition.
Faisal Chowdhury.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware of the anger in local authorities across Scotland that the Scottish Government is not planning to compensate them for the upcoming raise in national insurance, as councils in England and Wales are being compensated. This will inevitably cause further cuts to already stretched services. How does the First Minister justify leaving Scottish local authorities worse off for this change than their English counterparts?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, the UK Treasury block grant to the Scottish Budget does not identify consequential funding for national insurance contributions, so there are no identifiable consequentials to pass on. However, we are providing a settlement to local government that is fair and crucially affordable. The overall local government funding package of more than £12.5 billion represents an increase in real terms of 5.1%. In revenue alone, it's a real terms increase of 4.9%. So we will continue to treat local government as fairly as possible and support local government as far as we possibly can in delivering the services that people across the country rely on.
Emma Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the First Minister will be aware, my Dogs Protection of Livestock Amendment Scotland Act 2021 is now in force and provides Police Scotland and the courts with greater powers to investigate those who allow their dogs to worry, attack or kill livestock in Scotland's countryside. Livestock worrying can have serious animal welfare implications as well as significant financial and emotional impact on farmers. Can the First Minister, in light of lambing season approaching, outline what action the Scottish Government is taking to promote public awareness of the updated legislation?
First Minister.
Well, can I again congratulate Emma Harper on her success with this legislation. It is extremely important legislation. The Scottish Government, I can assure her, will take appropriate steps to raise awareness of it. Of course, we will do everything we can working with partners as appropriate to ensure appropriate enforcement of it. But it is a significant step forward and one that I know will be particularly welcomed across rural Scotland.
Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Since the extension of free personal care for people under the age of 65, no data has been recorded on the number of people who have now received this care. Now, given the problems which we've seen during the pandemic on people accessing care packages, and in fact with many being removed or cut, for individuals, we are finding that more and more people are reporting that it is people with complex needs and life-limiting conditions are not getting that care. So can I ask the First Minister, will the Scottish Government agree to establish a national recovery group alongside COSLA today to make sure that people who are entitled to free personal care get that and this is fully restored and delivered across Scotland?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, everybody who is entitled to free personal care should get free personal care, and of course the entitlements to free personal care in Scotland go far beyond the situation in other parts of the UK. I'm not going to give a commitment today to the proposition. I will consider it carefully, but I'm not going to say right now, before having the chance to consider it, that I think that would be the right way forward. I will also, however, look at the issue of data and come back to the member with an indication of when data is likely to be published, which will give a sense of how many people are uptaking that entitlement.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Constituents of Lansfield Quay in Glasgow are living with what has been deemed 22 intolerable risks to life as a result of flammable cladding on their building. They've been struggling to get a single building assessment on it, which was promised in June 2021. Can I ask the First Minister what she and her government could do to assist my constituent in obtaining this information as a matter of urgency?
First Minister.
Well, obviously, I know from my own position as constituency MSP here how important this is. The Government is taking forward steps to ensure single building assessments. I will ask the Housing Minister to write to the member with a full update on that work and what the next steps in it are.
Beatrice Wishart.
Oh. Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm having a hiccup with my glasses and the mask. Can the First Minister indicate what the Scottish Government's response is regarding the impact on Scotland of reports that the BBC licence fee will be cut after the current funding deal ends in 2027?
First Minister.
Well, I'm sure every member across this chamber from time to time will have gripes with or criticisms of the BBC, but the BBC is an important part of our broadcasting framework, and I think we should all defend the principle of public service broadcasting. So I'm deeply concerned at the announcements or hints of announcements that we saw earlier this week from the UK Government. I suspect and I think there is some evidence that these were an attempt to divert attention from the Prime Minister's troubles, but nevertheless I think all of us have to stand up for these principles and guard against this government and the damage it seems willing to do to key institutions, often just to try to save its own skin.
Question number 3, Maggie Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what impact the UK Government's Nationality and Borders Bill will have on devolved functions.
First Minister.
Well, the Scottish Government has profound concerns about this bill. We are currently considering its potential impact on areas that are devolved. If we conclude there is an impact on the legislative competence of this Parliament, we will lodge a legislative consent memorandum setting out the relevant provisions. There is no doubt, however, that the bill will have significant impacts on devolved services at local authorities and communities. Scottish ministers have written to the UK Government in relation to this bill 5 times, outlining our significant concerns, including with the Welsh Government, who share these concerns. I also note that the House of Commons Joint Committee on Human Rights yesterday said that the reforms of the asylum system proposed in the bill, and I'm quoting, would fail to meet the UK's human rights obligations and risk exacerbating the already unacceptable backlog. So we will continue to urge the UK Government to introduce a humane, effective and efficient system that delivers for people living in Scotland, including those who are fleeing war and persecution.
Maggie Chapman.
The Prime Minister's intention to use the military to prevent asylum seekers reaching the UK is deeply immoral, as is the possibility of trading access to COVID vaccines for the right to open detention centres in other countries. The First Minister will be aware of the appalling circumstances faced by many asylum seekers in Scotland, including in Aberdeen, in my region, accommodated in hotels but not given basic support or things like toiletries, culturally sensitive food, language classes and so on. While we do not have the powers to counter these racist policies, we can make sure that asylum seekers and refugees in Scotland are treated better. I'm sure the First Minister will join me in condemning the plans by the Prime Minister and his cruel and inhuman Home Office. Will she also outline what lessons have been learnt by the tragic death at Park Inn in Glasgow, and say what more we can do to prevent the growth of the use of institutional accommodation across Scotland and improve the support available through local authorities so that asylum seekers are treated with dignity?
First Minister.
Well, can I thank Maggie Chapman for the question? There's a lot of detail in that question, and I'll undertake to ask the relevant minister to write with more detailed answers than time will allow me to give today, including, for example, on the question of lessons learned from the dreadful circumstances around Park Inn in Glasgow. The UK Government, though, its plans to divert vessels in the Channel are dangerous, and I think it's important that we are all clear that they will significantly increase risk to life. Medicine Sans Frontiers stated, and I'm quoting again, that pursuing a policy of forced returns and engaging in pushback tactics is dangerous, inhumane and in breach of international law. It puts lives at risk at sea. In my view, people seeking asylum in the UK should be accommodated within communities where they can begin to rebuild their lives, where they have access to essential services and the support and advocacy they need, and also where they can make a contribution to the communities that they are living in, and the UK Government is failing to provide that. The Home Office hasn't shared yet its review of the tragedy at the Park Inn, but as I said a moment ago, I will ask the Scottish Government Minister responsible to write further about that. I think what we saw at the weekend, the comments we saw at the weekend, for example, about use of military, a bit like the comments on the BBC, were an attempt to divert attention from the troubles of the self-inflicted troubles of the Prime Minister. But we should not be using the BBC, and we should absolutely not be using refugees and asylum seekers in that way. I say we, the UK Government, should not be using refugees and asylum seekers in that way. It is utterly despicable, and I think another sign of the moral decay at the heart of this UK Government.
Question number 4, Stephanie Callaghan, who's joining us online.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to Public Health Scotland's census data, which states that 3 out of 4 care home places are now provided by private companies.
First Minister.
While the percentage of private sector care homes has increased, the overall balance of provision in care home places between the public and private sector has not changed markedly over the past decade. The number of care home places has remained relatively stable, which reflects our policy to support people at home for as long as possible. As we move towards the creation of the National Care Service, an ethical approach will be at the heart of how we commission and deliver services. All social care providers across Scotland, from the independent, third and public sectors, will continue to be subject to the same regulations, standards and guidelines. Ensuring the continuation of high-quality care home provision is and will continue to be the priority of the Scottish Government.
Stephanie Callaghan.
I thank the First Minister for a response. Given the prevalence of private care home provision across Uddingston and Bales Hill constituency and wider Scotland, how will the National Care Service deliver improved terms and conditions for private care home staff and ensure that high quality care for residents?
First Minister.
There's no doubt that the National Care Service will be the most significant change in public services, probably since the establishment of the National Health Service. So we're committed to delivering a service by the end of this Parliament in order to ensure that everybody gets the high quality care they're entitled to, regardless of where they live in the country. The consultation on the establishment of the National Care Service proposed that it will oversee the delivery of care, improve standards, ensure enhanced pay and conditions for workers and provide better support for unpaid carers, as well as supporting ethical commissioning of care. So all of that will lead to better outcomes for those who rely on our care services. It's important work, it's difficult work, it is in many aspects controversial work, but I hope that by the end of this Parliament this will be a significant public sector reform that future generations will come back and look on as fondly as we look on the establishment of the National Health Service.
Jackie Baillie. Irrespective of the status of the sector, the employees in social care are predominantly female and they're predominantly low paid. It is still the case that you can get paid more by working in hospitality and retail. There were vacancies before the pandemic, made worse by the pandemic. So will the First Minister back the GMB and Unite in their campaigns to pay care workers £15 per hour, starting with an immediate rise to £12 per hour in April?
First Minister.
Well, we are increasing the pay of those who work in the care sector, and I think it's important that while Jackie Baillie, as she always does, sets out the problem, it's this government that's delivering the solutions. So we are increasing the pay of social care workers. We will continue to do that. Of course, we have to do it within the bounds of affordability, and we will do that. But we are also committed to a National Care Service that, of course, will have collective bargaining and better paying conditions for social care staff absolutely at its heart. So we will continue to get on with doing the hard work that delivers the outcomes that Jackie Baillie calls for.
Question number 5, Finlay Carson.
To ask the First Minister whether she will provide an update on the delivery of Lot 1 of the R100 programme.
First Minister.
Of course, broadband investment is reserved to Westminster, but given the UK Government's failure to deliver on that, alongside its failure to deliver on so many other things, we've had to step in and make a difference. The R100 North contract was signed in December 2020. Despite the pandemic, a huge amount of preparatory work has been completed since. A remodelling exercise ensured that every connection delivered will be full fibre, and survey work for over 5,000 properties and 16 subsea cables, which will deliver vital backhaul connectivity to 15 Scottish islands. We anticipate by the end of June, the Northlock contract will have delivered over 4,000 connections. The R100 Scottish Broadband Voucher Scheme also ensures that everyone who wants a superfast broadband connection now can have one, with around 750 connections already delivered in the north of Scotland.
Finlay Carson.
Thank you. Not surprised by your response, and no doubt you will continue to try and fool the public into believing that the rollout of broadband is reserved and matter. And that line is wearing very thin. The practical rollout of broadband is devolved to the Scottish Government. And that line, as I say, is wearing things like the patience of the people in rural Scotland. The SNP talked up this scheme as reaching 100%, but rural communities are not getting what they're expected. Nearly 37,000 properties in Lot 1 will not get fibre from the main scheme. And the voucher scheme you talk about is delivering nothing, with only 4% of uptake so far. So the First Minister surely should rename the R100 scheme, promised by the SNP, as the R40 scheme, and it's 5 years late. The SNP promised their flagship R100 scheme would be delivered to everybody by 2021. Will the First Minister now apologise to the people and the businesses in rural and remote communities who might not get connected at all, and most of them won't get connected until 2027?
First Minister. Through the R100 contracts, the R100 Scottish Broadband Voucher Scheme and, of course, commercial coverage as well, we've ensured that every premises in Scotland can access a superfast broadband connection, despite telecoms being reserved. And that's not a matter of opinion, that's a matter of fact in the Scotland Act, which the member is free to go and check. To date, the UK Government's contribution to the R100 programme totals £31.5 million, 5% of the total, compared to £579 million invested by the Scottish Government. And the UK Government's own project, Gigabit, has yet to award a single procurement contract. So again, the Scottish Government is getting on with the job of delivering connections, while all the Scottish Conservatives can do is gripe and girn about it.
Thank you. Before we move on to question 6, can I just remind members to desist from shouting across the chamber when we're trying to hear questions and answers. And at question number 6, I call Neil Bibby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to ScotRail's plans to cut ticket office opening hours at 120 stations and to close free ticket offices entirely.
First Minister.
Well, the aim of this review is, of course, the modernisation of railway stations. Clearly, to most people, technology has changed how people want to access information and tickets, but of course we also need to acknowledge the importance of local staff services on the ground where and when they are needed. This consultation offers the public the chance to have their say on how to provide an efficient, modern service for the future, and we would encourage people to get involved. We will await the consultation findings before any final decisions are made on the proposals.
Neil Bibby.
Ticket office staff play a crucial role in making our railway safe and accessible, and many go above and beyond, such as Dalmuir workers whose quick thinking recently saved a life. A properly staffed rail network is central to reducing car use and meeting Scotland's climate ambitions. Yet under this government, rail is being undermined. ScotRail is cutting 300 services per day. Fares will be hiked up by 3.8% next week. Ticket desks are shutting, and there is still no fully integrated smart ticketing for passengers. To drive modal shift, the rail network must be more attractive and more accessible to passengers. So will the First Minister stop these ticket office closures?
First Minister.
We'll consult on what a modern system of railway stations and offices looks like. I absolutely agree about the importance of ticket office staff, and where they are necessary, it's important to recognise that. But everybody knows that at many railway stations now, the ticket process is automated, so we have to reflect that on how these services are delivered in future, and it's right that we consult properly so that we come to the right balanced decisions. We're investing heavily in our railways. We will continue to do so to ensure that it provides a service that people in Scotland need and have a right to expect and that they deserve. And also, just to continue this theme of opposition parties calling for things, but this government getting on with delivery. Of course, it's this government that is in the process of bringing ScotRail into public ownership, delivering the nationalisation that Scottish Labour only talks about.
John Mason.
Thank you. Given that passenger numbers are dramatically down on the railways and ScotRail therefore depends on the public purse for an increased subsidy, does the First Minister agree that ScotRail does have to look at its costs and reduce them if possible?
First Minister.
We've got to make sure that we have a modern service, that we have a service that is efficient, and of course for taxpayers that we have a service that provides value for money. But we are supporting our rail franchises right now with more than £1 billion, including £450 million of additional funding via the pandemic emergency measures. And we will continue to do so to ensure that Scotland does have the railway service that it needs and deserves. And of course, as I said earlier on, we'll bring it into public ownership, which I think is something the majority of people will welcome.
Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, 50% of lung cancer patients are diagnosed at stage 4, with mortality rates high for this cancer. During COVID restrictions, there were 25% less people diagnosed and 25% less people in treatment. Does the First Minister recognise that COVID restrictions have a significant impact on many other conditions that will be felt long after the COVID pandemic has passed?
First Minister.
Yes, I do. I think, if memory serves me correctly, we had an exchange on this issue, a very important exchange on this issue last week. Early diagnosis of cancer and the earliest possible staging of cancer is vital. That's why we're investing so heavily in the Detect Cancer Early programme. It's why we have established or are establishing fast-track cancer diagnostic centres so that people with symptoms
that are not the most common symptoms of cancer can get the same fast-track access and fast-track, we hope, diagnosis as those on the urgent suspicion of cancer referral pathway. So that is really important, and we're absolutely committed to ensuring the earliest possible diagnosis. Of course, staging is not the only thing that's important. We then need to make sure that people get quick access to high-quality care and treatment, and that's a big part of our focus in terms of cancer services too.
And Neil Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. With UK inflation hitting a 30-year high and energy costs spiralling for households with no action from the UK Government, and the standard rate of universal credit having been cut by £20 per week by the UK Government, can the First Minister outline what impact this has all had on her Government's ability to meet her child poverty targets, and also whether or not she supports the Poverty Alliance's campaign to see the punitive welfare cap scrapped by the UK Government?
First Minister. Yes, I do fully support that Poverty Alliance campaign. I'll be blunt about it. The UK Government is making the poorest poorer, and they're doing that knowingly, and it is utterly despicable. The removal of the £20 a week universal credit uplift has impacted some of the poorest families in our society. And these actions are making it more difficult for the Scottish Government to live up to our responsibilities to tackle child poverty. But we are doing more, doubling the Scottish child payment. The Scottish child payment, a child payment like the Scottish child payment, doesn't exist in any other part of the UK. And having established it, we're now taking steps to double it. So we're doing everything we can. But if we weren't up against the government pulling in the opposite direction, we'd be able to do more and have a much greater impact, which is, of course, the powerful argument for having all of these levers in the hands of Scottish governments and the Scottish Parliament, not leaving them in the hands of Westminster governments.
That concludes First Minister's questions. There will be a short pause before members' business.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.